This is a Surface 604 Shred XS, extra small. So having a smaller frame size means you have a shorter reach, you have a lower standover height, 16-inch right here on the seat, tube length, 26-inch standover height, which is amazing. And it's just like 30.5-inch minimum saddle height if you take that all the way down. And that's really hard to find on e-bikes in general that are kind of like, you know, high step, diamond frame, off-road capable like this. This is really cool. 26-inch wheel diameter by 2.8. So these are plus size tires, 2.8 inches, really wide, deep, like chunky knobs on these things. The bike is a blast. In part because you've got this Bafang planetary geared hub motor, rated 500 to 750 watts, 65 Newton meters of torque is what they're saying, and you get a mechanical advantage improvement when you have a smaller wheel size. So they also have a regular shred, and it's a little bit bigger. I think they have like a small, medium, large on that, but it's 27.5-inch wheels. I mean, technically it's like a cross-country electric mountain bike, but it almost resembles a BMX bike to me. I would totally have been into this when I was a kid. It's got the motor, it's got the throttle. You can unlock it and go even faster. I think up to like 28 miles per hour, but it ships as a class 2. So 20 mile per hour, 32 kilometer per hour. It's got a torque sensing pedal assist. So there's this little plate right here, this black plate, and it sort of, it strains as you're pedaling and, you know, putting pressure onto the pedals, the cranks, and the chain, the drivetrain here. And so the motor responds more naturally. Like if you're not pushing very hard, even if you're in the highest level of assist, you're not going to get a lot of power. But as soon as you really push into that thing, or let's say you're approaching a hill and you're just naturally having to spend more energy, well, it responds naturally. And it's kind of neat, especially on a bike that could be used in more technical terrain. By comparison, if you have a cadence sensor, it's just really like magnets passing a sensor that says on or off. This is a really cool setup. Surface 604 is known for that. Most of their bikes are torque sensing, and they have a bunch of other little upgrades like this Samox hollow spindle bottom bracket. It's sturdier, it's light. We have a narrow wide chainring up here, so that really grabs the chain. It's not going to drop off as easily. You don't have like a, you know, a guide or like a retainer, but this is still better than average. And the drivetrain itself, SRAM X5 11 to 36 tooth cassette in the rear, 9-speed with the SRAM X5 trigger shifters. It's pretty good. Definitely an upgrade. It's kind of like 3 steps up, sort of like a Shimano Alivio, almost like a Dior. And I love to see that. It's just going to last longer. It's going to shift more smoothly. We have a little bit of exposed wires back here, and there's no derailleur guard. So sometimes I like to see those little metal things that just protect this if the bike tips over, especially if you're riding off-road. Maybe you're going by branches. These wires can get snagged a little bit, but they're fairly tucked away. We have quick disconnects here, so if you need to change a flat tire or something, you can. One complaint I have about the drivetrain is there's no slap guard here, so over time, as that chain going up and down, especially in the highest gear, which is the smallest sprocket, the chain is gonna hit that chainstay and might chip the paint and just get it kind of messy. And they didn't include like a plastic slap guard or anything. You might want to just get some clear box tape and put something of your own just to protect that a little bit more. It's not going to damage. This is like a hydroformed aluminum alloy frame, so it's not going to rust, but it is going to show some wear over time. These are Innova tires. They don't have reflective sidewalls or puncture protection that I'm aware of, but again, it's kind of hard to find a tire in this particular size, and they've been working great, really grabbing onto this sort of soft, loamy, wet terrain today as I've been riding around. And I want to point out the thicker spokes on both of the wheels here, black rims, black hubs, including the motor, about 9 pounds on that motor. And the battery, while we're talking about weight, about 7.5 pounds for the stock battery, 48 volt, 14 amp hour, but they also have a 20 amp hour battery pack, so you can go high capacity. And that one's sort of, it's not quite as symmetrical. Like, see how this one's sort of thin and it matches the width of the down tube. If you get the higher capacity battery, it spills out a little bit to the left, which to me is like not quite as beautiful as this. And it's going to add some extra weight, 7.7 pounds versus 10 pounds on that higher capacity. But it has 21,700 cells instead of 18,650, so higher energy density, kind of like a higher quality pack. And this is the stock charger, weighs about 1.5 pounds, you know, pretty typical. 2 amp, so you know it's going to take a little bit longer to charge with this, but it's light, and you know, it gets the job done. I guess there are some trade-offs in where you plug in. You can see that's the charge port, and it's right next to the crank arm. So if you're plugged in and these get cycled backwards, it could actually like break that off or crack the plastic and maybe even tip the bike over depending on how hard you kick it. I wish this was up higher. That is one of the benefits if you get the higher capacity battery, that the charging port is up here near the locking core, which you insert the keys and just twist to get the battery off. I'll try to demonstrate that. So it's a Rienshin Dorado battery pack. You just insert the keys, pull this little lever, and it kind of tips out to the side, and about 7.5 pounds on this thing, 48 volt, 14 amp hour, 672 watt hours for the stock battery. And that's nice. You can take it off the bike, which makes it lighter for loading onto cars, or maybe you have to leave this in a garage or at the bike rack. You want to take the expensive, sensitive bit inside. Ideally, this would be in a cool, dry location, kept between 20 and 80% charged. Extreme heat is going to damage the cells. You're not going to get the full cycles after a while. It's going to just have lower and lower capacity. And extreme cold will temporarily like reduce your range on this. You might even get half range if it's very cold. If it's freezing cold, maybe you let the battery stabilize before you charge it. I think that can be hard on the cells. But one nice thing about it is you've got that USB port built right into the pack, so you can actually have like portable energy in addition to having a little USB charge port built right into the bottom of the display. That is so cool. So many people use their phone for GPS or get additional lights and accessories. To have two options is pretty neat. The bike, as we see it here, I was weighing it earlier, and it was like 59.8 pounds or something, which surprised me. That's kind of a lot for a bike that doesn't have fenders, doesn't have racks or anything. I just think the tires add a lot of weight. There's a lot of rubber. This fork here, it's like 100mm travel. It's a boost fork. So this bike actually has boost hub spacing, which means that the hubs are wider. Instead of 100mm, this is 110. Instead of 135, it's like 138 back there. And so that gives you a sturdier spoke bracing angle and room for the wider cassette and stuff. This is a thru-axle up front, 15mm with I think 6mm hex bolt, and in the back it's just the threaded 12mm slotted axle. So the back is like, yeah, it's a little wider, but kind of standard stuff with bolts. On the front, to have the boost hub spacing, the 15mm thru-axle, and this fork here, which is actually a straight steer post, the steer tube is actually tapered. So I think you could upgrade on this. You could save some weight. That's my point. This is like steel stanchions, spring suspension. Pretty nice, but not as light as like a Fox Float or something with like air. You do have, thankfully, like this lockout adjust over here, kind of like compression lockout. And then we have preload on the other side, so you can preload those springs if you're someone who's heavier. But again, this is the Shred XS, extra small. So, you know, young people, or maybe it's like a his and her setup, and women tend to be more petite, so you could get a regular Shred and then this, and a little bit lower standover height. It just feels like right sized. It's so nice to have an option like this, and one that's pretty high quality. Like coming back to some of the components I was talking about, 170mm crank arms, which I was a little surprised about, that they didn't go 165 or something, just because you wouldn't get as many pedal strikes since the whole bike is a little bit lower. But still, it's kind of standard. And then we have these Wellgo platform pedals with like the integrated pins and the nice reflectors and stuff. Look at that extra gusset here for strength. That's our top tube hydroformed. There's our down tube with the semi-integrated battery. It brings the weight low and center on the frame. And then a lot of internal routing on the wires. They do expose a little bit there at the bottom bracket, but they're kind of protected by the chain ring. There's no chain cover or anything, so, you know, I'm wearing jeans today. They could get a little bit messy and get snagged potentially. And overall, again, the drivetrain itself, pretty nice. As we walk up front, you can see like a whole mess of cables because there's just so much going on here. I mean, we have a headlight that is perfectly positioned, in my opinion, and this is a nice light. This is the Bushell Shiny 120. It's like 120 lux. It's got little side windows, so it's visible from more angles, and it's got a metal bracket mount. Okay, like a lot of times I'll see headlights down here on the arch of a suspension fork, and that's like unsprung, so it's bouncing all up and down. It's getting blocked by the tire. This is much higher, and for a bike that's a little bit lower to the ground, that's just perfect. It's bright, it points where you steer, and yes, it crowds maybe the display mount, but that still pivots a little bit. And then, you know, we got our hydraulic brakes, and the bike has pretty nice brakes. So these are Tektro Ariga Ecomp 180 millimeter rotors front and rear with dual piston calipers. 180 millimeters for 26-inch wheels, pretty good. But again, plus size tires, it's kind of like getting closer to that 27.5 true diameter, which gives you a lower attack angle and stuff. Coming back to that tire size, the plus size tires, the increased air volume is going to give you like some extra cushion, and then the width gives you improved traction, that lower attack angle I was talking about, and just stability from side to side. It's not like a big fat tire, and that in terms of steering and stuff, it feels still fairly nimble and light compared to like a fat tire e-bike. Sometimes they just feel really big, more like you're riding on a bike versus you're riding with the bike. So anyway, these brake levers have adjustable reach too, so there's a little set screw and you can bring them in or set them out a little bit depending on your hand size, which again, for an extra small bike is really nice to have. They both have motor inhibitors, which is wonderful, so anytime you activate that, you're not going to be fighting that hub motor. And the bike is pre-wired for a rear light, so if you added a rear rack, you can see there's some additional hardware back here, little bolts. You could add a rear rack, and then they have that light would be integrated, and it activates like flashing when you stop. So that's really cool, and that's one of the areas where I love that they've included that hardware, because they got rid of the bottle cage bosses that were here on the down tube, maybe just because there's not as much clearance anymore. Maybe people weren't using them, it didn't look cool, I don't know. I kind of like to have options like that, but on an extra small bike, I guess I can understand that they traded it. The stem is also shorter and it's flat, so it's elevated here with a couple spacers, but it's a flat sort of like North America, you know, kind of has that different look. I was talking to the engineer who was like designing this, and he was talking about how he balanced the rake so that it felt stable. I did some riding with no hands earlier, and the bike tracked really well. In general, the bike's been working great. 30.4 millimeters on that seat post, 350 millimeter length. So I took it, you know, it was pretty high when I was riding earlier so I could get full leg extension, and they have that like maximum height mark on the seat post. So you just don't want to go beyond that or you could damage some of this, but it felt sturdy to me, and it was working really well even higher. I'm glad they went with a 350 millimeter instead of something really short. And since you don't have any bolts down here, I mean, you can drop this all the way down and get that low minimum saddle height. Keep in mind, they do sell a suspension post as an option from Suntour, SR Suntour. So you could have front suspension and saddle suspension. But if you do that, you're gonna add a few inches here to your minimum saddle height. And so your standover is still gonna be low, but you're gonna have to like jump up to get on the saddle. The Selle Royal Nebula is working pretty well. It's kind of like, yeah, you know, gets the job done. Grips, not locking, so they could twist a little bit. It's a little cheaper here. Flick bell, having the price point of $25.99 fits in line with a lot of their other bikes, and I think that's pretty good. In general, you know, it's set up like most of their other bikes. It shares a lot of the same parts, and I'm noticing little things as I look around. They have that like slightly larger quick release lever here. It doesn't hurt my fingers as much when I use it. They have this kickstand that's adjustable length, and it's positioned pretty well. We don't get pedal lock like if you're backing the bike, but I did notice as I was pedaling earlier, like here it's stowed, as I was pedaling the bike, I would actually like occasionally hit my heel on the kickstand. And it is mounted on the inside of that tab right now, but it still kind of flares out a little bit, and I just, you know, I'm wearing pretty big boots, but I did notice that I clip my heel on this occasionally, and I didn't love that. But I like having a kickstand, and it's working pretty well otherwise. Let's talk about the display. Everything's fairly reachable from the left grip, but it's a bit of a gap here because of the trigger throttle, and that's just how it goes. Ultimately, I find myself like powering on the bike like this, and you have to hold the power button for just a second. It's a Surface 604 color display, which is really nice. It's very large. It does swivel a little bit to reduce glare. Battery percentage at the top, gotta love that. It's more precise than just like 5 or 10 little bars or dots. Then we have power as well as your speed in the middle. So power is like how much power the motor is producing, and then of course how fast you're going, which is cool. Assist level down here, there are 5 levels of assist by default, and you can go to 0 and then the throttle doesn't work. You basically just have the light and a display and that charge port, or we take it all the way up to the highest. I tend to like that because again, it is a torque sensing drive system, so you know, even in the highest level assist, you can just feather it and it's not going to get out of control. You have trip distance, odometer. If I tap the I button, we cycle through and get max speed, average speed, time, and then back to odometer. I like having that dedicated headlight button and that there is a little headlight icon. And one of the things they said is with the older bikes from Surface 604, you turn on the light and the display would dim because they assumed you were riding at night and they didn't want to blind you with the display. But the thing is, a lot of people like to ride during the day with the light on just for safety, so they disconnected those two. If you want, you can actually go into the settings, hold plus and minus for a second, and then press I for settings. You can change from metric to imperial and how bright the display is, LCD luminance. You can set, there's like state of charge, trip reset, sensitivity, and a password down here. Password is cool because you can lock the bike. So if you don't want people tampering with it, that's a really cool option. We'll just get out. And there's advanced settings as well. And this is where you could change, like ideally you'd leave the wheel size the same, but speed limit. So you could upgrade this a little bit for off-road use or private property or whatever. It's just neat to have that option. Potentially turn this into class 3 if you like took the throttle off. And that's about it. So now I think we can hop on this and do a little riding. But first I'm gonna raise that seat again. There we go. It looks a little funky, but it feels just right. Hop on this. Whoa. Very good. Perfect for a little trail like this. And as I was saying, it's fairly stable because of those wider plus size tires, especially once you get a little speed. The suspension fork is really nice. 32 millimeter stanchions, a little bit wider, stiffer, and it helps to handle the width of the boost hub spacing and these bigger tires and stuff. So it feels like, you know, good hardware just shrunk down a little bit smaller. And that's nice because so many times you'll see like a niche, you know, small bike or something, but it's like everything is weaker and everything is cheaper. I don't feel like they nerfed anything on this bike. They just kind of made it smaller. And it feels really good, even to me. I'm 5'9", by the way, about 135 pounds. I can have a blast on this. I can still get that full leg extension, or almost full. You can hear the knobs on the concrete. But the motor's pretty quiet. And the PSI range on these tires is pretty good. It's like 15 to 30 PSI. So you can bring it down and have a good amount of cushion. Okay, I'm gonna pedal around in assist level 5 so you can see how quickly that motor starts and stops. It's really quiet. I've really been impressed. Edge. Blast. Well guys, that's about it. I've had a blast with this Surface 604 Shred XS. As usual, I studied all the specs, put them on the website, ElectricBikeReview.com, and there's a comparison tool, so you could look at the regular Shred and this one and all their other bikes. I think they have a good offering. It's a Canadian company, but they sell in the US, Canada, and New Zealand now, which is great. Decent warranty, free shipping in the contiguous US and Canada, which is cool too. There's also forums at Electric Bike Review, so you can ask people about what accessories or what tires if you want to swap these out someday. It's always nice to get feedback like that. Love ya, ride safe, and we'll see you next time.